Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Karl Forehand. And before we get to our guest for the evening, you have anything you need to fill us in on? Catch us up on, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we just released a special issue podcast last night about listening sessions. I think it's kind of a desire we've always had, you know, and so many people that are deconstructing do kind of cottage industry stuff and try to, you know, charge people. After they get a little better and feel a little better, they start trying to have cottage industry things. And for us, I don't know if that works, but one thing we can do, I think, is we can listen to people. It's a big part of what we've learned with 280 podcast episodes is just by listening to someone's story, that does something for that person. And it also helps us. That's mostly how we've grown. So anyway, we just opened up the Calendly scheduler thingy, whatever that's called. Yeah. And got our first one last night. So tomorrow night we'll be listening to somebody. And we'd love to listen to you. We just want to hear your story, what you're going through. And we're not professional counselors, but we have plenty of those types of people that we can move you to if that's a desire you have. But I think just telling your story, just having someone that will listen to you without judgment, with eyes of grace, if you will, does something for you. It helps heal you. And so we're kind of opening that up recently. We've got the book and the blog and the podcast and all that stuff still. But here we go. That's not what we're here for today, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a bio, but that's okay. Because this is a good friend of ours, been a friend of ours for a while. And so I think you guys kind of chatted and decided to do a podcast together. So we are here to welcome Donald Jonas to the podcast. Welcome. Of course, we call you Jonas.
Jonas.
So
is that what everybody does?
Everybody calls me Jonas. Yeah.
It's really funny.
My mom calls me Jonas.
That's funny.
Before
the podcast even started, I asked Karl, I said, so what's his last name? And he goes, that is his last name. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome. We're glad to have you on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Thanks a lot.
So it's kind of like Michael Jordan. When you have a one name, that means you've arrived, you've gotten somewhere when people call you by your name, but one name and they know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it started a long time ago, and I don't even write my whole name down on mostly anything, just because I don't know. It's just what everybody's always called me since about college, and I kind of like it. You know, it's a good name.
Yeah, for sure. So we'd like to hear your story. Of course, we know you fairly well. We live a couple hours away, and now you live all over the place. And you can talk about that if you want to later. But kind of fill us in on your story, how you got from there to here, and we'll just build off of that.
You're talking about church and my religious experience and that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Southern Baptist church in Kansas, and my mother was young. She was real young, and my dad grew up in an Episcopal church, and he was pretty mellow. He went to the church and he helped out a lot, but he wasn't really too into it. My mom was really into it, so I grew up in the Baptist church. I had the whole experience of living through the Bill Gothard days with all kinds of levels of Old Testament, rule of law and order and discipline and all that kind of thing. And I really don't consider my childhood years in church really a lot of fun. There were fun times. Summer camp was good, and there were moments, but the church that I went to was really quite discipline heavy. And just there was a lot of I grew up, I felt really anxious from growing up like that. And then I went off to college, and I didn't really go to college at all, go to church at all in college. And I used to always say, I'd try going to church again now that I'm grown up if somebody invited me. And then sure enough, this guy invited me. And so I went to a Disciples of Christ church in college just for a few months because I was almost ready to graduate. And then when I got out of college, I liked the Disciples of Christ church so much that I went to more Disciples of Christ church as a young adult when I moved back to Kansas City from Oklahoma. And sure enough, that's where I met Christina. And she and I were youth group leaders in the church. And the Disciples of Christ church that she and I attended together was where I learned what I believe to be my religious inspiration. And really, it was the best experience I've ever had in a church. They loved me for who I was, and the church really talked a lot about serving. That's where I worked in a soup kitchen for a long time through that church. We took our kids to the same soup kitchen when we got married and had kids. We were still going to the soup kitchen and took our kids there for a few years. And I loved that church because they loved me. And because the whole time I was there, they just talked about serving. And then we went to we didn't go to church for a while because we had little babies, and I just didn't like going to church with little kids. And then when the kids got into about middle school or so, we went back to church, and we went to a church we really liked that the other church actually recommended us to because we lived in a whole different part of the Metroplex, another Disciples of Christ church. And that's the church that changed my heart because I was raised very conservative in every way. And that's the church that changed my heart about immigrants, especially Mexican immigrants. And that church taught me to have a different heart and a different approach to that whole situation. So I went to those churches. I really loved the Disciples of Christ church. I really feel like I learned to be a disciple of Christ. I don't necessarily identify with a religion, but I believe that what I learned from Christ's story, and that element of love and love your neighbor and acceptance was really what I dwelled on when I quit going to churches. And so I just quit going to church because the kids were growing up, and one of the church we were in kind of had a big I know you'll understand this, had a big throwdown. And we just didn't feel like we needed to stay there and be in the middle of all that. And so we just pretty much quit going to church, and I haven't been to church since the kids were in barely high school. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I don't consider myself unchurched because I believe that we are all, within God, no matter where we are. I don't feel like I have to have a building for it or a minister. I kind of see church now as an education. Like I went to college and got a degree, and I'm moving into something else now.
Yeah, certainly with the internet has changed things. I think I don't think it's ruined anything. I think it's evolved. That there's no longer gatekeepers of information.
That's right.
I'm asking the question right now, should we have theologians? Are theologians necessary in the 21st century? And it's based off of a bad experience I had a few months ago or a couple of months ago, but it started me questioning that. Do we need theologians when all of the information is available to us? It's not like we live on the prairie, and someone with some religious education has to come. And are they, and I also ask the question occasionally, you mentioned love your neighbor. Shouldn't we maybe have just stopped at love your neighbor and then called it good, instead of building up these systems, which are really fear and control.
Right.
So we've moved, as you know, we've moved on from being a pastor and pastor's wife to doing whatever we're doing now. We call it being here in the desert. Can you talk about your life on the road? Is about that adventure or any adventure you want? I know you work with kids, trying to get them outdoors and get them active. You're a speaker and so on. Can you talk some more about the other parts of your life, whatever you want to talk about?
Yeah, I want to kind of just address that theologian question just for a second. And I do think there's room for theologians, just like I think there's room for people who teach language or teach or teach history or teach anything else. And I think that even if people can find the theology on the internet, I think that people who walk the earth to inspire others are valuable when they stick with when they're proper and when they're cool, and when they don't take advantage of their position. And so I really don't want the bad rap that some theologians bring to the world to cloud out other people who are inspired to know words more than others and share them and inspire other people to think about them. So, I'm good with theologians. I just, I want them to be a theologian and not a politician and not a this and not a, all that other kind of stuff they've kind of moved into. But I think there's plenty of room for theologians. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just a little background. I worked for 20 years as a historic preservationist on homes, antique houses, and historic homes. And then in 2018, my wife and I started talking about hitting the road full time in a travel trailer because we'd always dreamed about it. Our kids were growing out of the house, and we knew we didn't want to do it in our 70s. And we're not retired, and we're not bazillionaires or anything like that. We're just working it out. And we sold everything we owned in 2019, our house, our belongings. We kept nothing. The only things we kept went to our son's house, and that was like artwork and stuff. And so we hit the road July 4th, 2019, Independence Day. And we have been out on the road just a little over 4 years now. And the lifestyle for us, and we don't think this is for everybody by any means, but the lifestyle for us is fabulous. And it has a lot to do with mostly our age and maturity, right? I mean, we get along really well just because we're older, and we really work hard to get along in this lifestyle. But we're outdoors all the time. We stay in beautiful spots. We boondock a lot because we have our own electricity. And so we've really enjoyed this lifestyle. And along the way, when I moved out of the house, I really thought I was going to go into doing more window classes and that kind of historic house classes. So I signed up for a speaker's class, like a real good one, a real professional speaker's class, and I invested in it. And I got to tell you, I sat down to fill out the application, and I stood there and realized that I was facing a crossroad that I'd been looking at for a long time and just never committed. And that was, I was about ready to fill out that form and that I wanted to speak about historic homes and windows. And what I really knew was that I wanted to work with kids. And I started a youth well, I've worked with kids since I was in college. I always have. And I joke that I don't even like kids, but people ask me to help. And it's really the way it's always been. I've always been recruited into helping out with the kids, youth groups, the swim lessons, the public schools, and all that. And I've always been invited to, and I love it. I love working with kids. And so in 2011, I founded the Donderdag Youth Cyclocross Clinics and started coaching cyclocross because my kid was racing. And so I still do that to this very day. And that program is a big part of my effort and plan to move into public speaking to kids. And I've got a really nice talk written about getting kids outdoors. And the only thing I've done more than worked in my life was go home, and mostly out at home, I'm outdoors. Even when we had a house, I was always outside the house. And if there's anything I have experience in, it's being outdoors. And after 12 years of watching kids in my own program, racing cyclocross and training cyclocross, I just know how beneficial it is for the human child to be outdoors, to be expending effort, and to be challenging themselves in natural elements, rain, snow, mud, all of it. And I believe in it so much that that's my next job, is to go serve those kids and those families and help families get outdoors. And so Christine and I are both working on those kinds of things. We're both working on independent employment gigs, and we're both moving into coaching because we've worked so many years with so many people and we've put our heart into it. And we believe in those people. And so I'm actually writing a coaching program now to introduce and sell to families. And I'm going to help families coach their kids to the great outdoors. I've been outdoors so many times and I have not yet once grown tired of it. I joke that I like to go in the house to sleep and eat. That's about it. I even have an outdoor shower. So yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah. And our most recent book is called Leaning Forward. And where that phrase comes from is from back in Oklahoma. And when I know you have some history with Oklahoma, but in Oklahoma, during junior high, at that time, people would just turn their kids out. And in the summer, especially, they just let them go. And somehow, like, people would pop out a door and go, "Your mama said go home." And I don't know how they found it and things like that. Anyway, it was so prevalent that there was a thing that came on TV at 11 o'clock at night that said, "It's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?"
Yeah.
Because it just turned us out. But
because we didn't come home.
Right.
We didn't come home.
So
the whole streetlight rule was just a hint. Yeah. I came home after the streetlights all the time.
Yeah. And I would go down this drainage ditch, and then we get to the end of that drainage ditch and see the public school. We went to a private school. It had different playground equipment, so we went to get on the Geodome. I don't know if you remember that thing. The thing you could crawl all over, but then we also stood on top of it, and we'd see like a tractor out in a field, and you'd kind of say, "What's that?" And then we go sit on that tractor and mess around with it for a while and probably tear it up. And then we'd see something else like a grove of trees, and we got to see what that is. And then that became our playground for a while as we were flipping out of trees into a pond that nobody should have ever been in.
Nice.
Then we'd find a creek and pick up crawdads. And that's how we titled our last book, was Leaning Forward, because that's what we were always doing, was exploring. And I think, at some point we get too civilized and we pull back and say, these are the things I know. Speaking of church, these are the things I believe. These are the things these are safe things. These are things I can do. And we pull back and we don't keep exploring. Mm-hmm. And I think the exploration of the outdoors may be the best thing about it. Mm-hmm. It's finding things you've never seen before, learning from that instead of just defending what I already know. Right.
Yeah. I refer to that in kids as stagnation. You get a kid that's inside the house too many days, too many hours in a row, especially if they're sedentary on a piece of furniture or a bed, or they're just living on screens. Those kids stagnate. That's just a biological fact. Their body stagnates, their lymph nodes, their blood system, their everything about that body starts to shut down when it just sits still for hours at a time. So there's that stagnation. Then there's the mental. There's a physical stagnation. Then you've got mental stagnation, because if they're sitting around, most of their brain is occupied by a screen, either a television on cable or the internet or whatever screen they're on. But most kids in American families don't go home and sit down on a sofa and read a book or draw a picture or something. There's a lot of screens in people's lives. And then you get the emotional stagnation, because they're not used to being out with other kids and resolving issues on the fly, which is what happens when you're jumping in a pond, or you got a piece of rope stretched over a little bit of a cliff, or your bicycle breaks down. There's 5 of you out and it's raining. People learn how to resolve issues and conflict among one another and all kinds of things when they're outdoors. They scream at each other, then they're laughing, and then they're duking it out. And that's their emotional health that's at stake. So I just try to get kids to identify and own their stagnation and to start avoiding it. And the first step is to step out of the house. No animal on this planet does well contained. Zoos know it. We know it. Schools know it. Jailhouses know it. Everybody knows when a person stays in a building for too much time, they start to get a little loopy. So we want them to get outdoors. We want them to breathe, get scuffed up, flush out their systems, sweat, bleed, cry, whatever they want to do that day. But when you get outdoors, your body automatically starts to get better. No matter what your attitude is or how you feel about things that day, because your body's outdoors in its most natural location, it naturally starts to have a better blood pressure system and your heart rate settles down. And all kinds of things start to happen in your body because of the sunlight and your mitochondria. So yeah, getting kids outdoors sounds real simple, but in today's world full of distractions, time theft, addiction, and everything else that's going on in today's world, getting outdoors is literally one of the most economical and healthiest things a human child can do.
And you said religion. You're okay with a little bit of theology, but then, so have we done the same thing in religion? Where we drive to a building, we sit in a building, we listen to a speaker, or we listen to them online. Are we stagnating, to use your word, in churches as well?
Well, I think that would be a generalization. And I think there's some churches that have just basically gone full capitalism and just go on for profit, even though they're filed with the government differently. But then there's a bunch of churches out there that are kind of in the middle, and they're really happy doing a Sunday morning thing and providing, the service that they want. And then there's churches that are just so dysfunctional and poisonous that the best thing to do at those churches is get out of them and clear them out. More stagnation, wash them out. That's why I never felt bad about leaving a church. I mean, I'll do my voting and volunteer and all that kind of stuff. But if the power at the top of the church starts to fall apart and ruin the church, everyone should just leave. They should just leave that building and literally let it run out of money and let everybody walk out of there for a while and leave it alone and let that building be a different church later. Because the rest of that time that you're spending on power and all those other things that happen in those churches does not do anything for us in our hearts and our minds. And it doesn't do anything to inspire us to do what Jesus said, which is get up out of the temple and walk out of here and go serve. And so, yeah, no, I think there's plenty of stagnation in some churches, and I think some churches really suck, but I think there's a lot of churches out there. I went to church with my mom a couple of weeks ago in Oklahoma, little Methodist church in Maysville. That's about as rural, of a little town as you can get. And the church was really an Old Testament kind of rule of law kind of church, but they were real nice and they were real friendly and my mom loves it there and they love my mom. So yeah. I think there's room in the middle to approach all of these issues. I think there's room in the middle.
Yeah. So you talked about a message a while ago, a message to children, message to people. What would be your message to those that might listen to this podcast? What's the most important things?
Well, this just came up a couple weeks ago because we had a little political issue in Shawnee, Kansas, where the city council apparently made some sort of an announcement about the transgender kids or the LGBTQ community or whatever in town that was considered negative by some who may be LGBTQ. And so it got back to me through the grapevine because somehow or another somebody said that the Donnerdag program was upset about that and all this other kind of stuff. So I had to make a public announcement and I had to make it in writing. Here's how we do it with kids and our approach on that. We meet kids where they're at. We are the adults on the field. when a child walks in the room, children are going through so many different growing cycles in their bodies and in their minds and all that. To me, it's our job as the adults to meet the children where they're at. And if a child comes up and introduces themselves, that's who that child is to me. And I'm happy to go with that, because it's not my business to stand there and sort that child out right in front of my eyes. My job is to serve that child and find out how I can help that child become more courageous, more confident in themselves, and more able to critically think for themselves. And the reason I love cyclocross is because they learn how to do all that on the fly. When you're riding a cyclocross bike in the middle of a rainstorm in a race with people ringing bells and throwing mud at you and all this kind of craziness, children know how to critically think suddenly and on the fly. And that's my bottom line with kids, is serving them and coaching them to be strong and courageous. And I have no interest in debating anyone in any churches or any state houses about where children find themselves and identify themselves and choose to live their lives.
Yeah, I love that.
And I just think, I say this all the time. I wish Jesus would walk into the room. I wish Jesus would walk into this party I'm at right now tonight. I wish that would happen, because I think that guy is ready to serve, to step on to this planet and serve. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of people when he's not mean and grumpy, and he just gets down to business and gets some stuff done without being all judgment about it.
Mm. So when we were raising kids, we at one point we thought we knew a lot, and then at another point we realized we didn't know much at all. I think it was when our second child was born. But then we, looking back, and when I started my religious deconstruction, I started thinking about, what went well, what didn't. And I realized there's really a few things, and I'd like to have you comment on these. Number one is we realized we needed to evolve out of a fear-based parenting system. What I mean by that is, I'm afraid they're going to get pregnant. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid they're whatever. And that motivated my parenting. I realized at some point that's wrong. But also I wanted to teach them to be brave. You talked about courage. And so maybe kind of rehashing that. But also something else that you talked about in adventures is we learn to think for ourselves. So getting rid of fear, being brave, and thinking for ourselves.
I think right now in today's America, the best thing a parent can do for their kids is to take a breath, shave about 50% of the activities off the calendar. Most kids are overscheduled and overschooled. And I just see kids so burned out by the time they get to college that by the time they go to college, they're just worn out. And, I was a punk rock dad, right? I mean, I was a punk rocker when I got married. I probably wasn't really the best marriage material out there, but when I was raising kids, I was pretty rowdy and noisy and that kind of thing. But I will say that we limited, and we always had a Friday together every night, and we kept things real simple, and is really overstimulated. We really receive more information, more hours of the day, and higher concentrations than we are probably evolved to deal with, right? Especially if we're a growing, developing human with all kinds of things going on inside our body with chemical and hormone changes. This constant bombardment of blue screen information into our brain and into our faces and into our eyes and into our emotions and our hearts, yelling news announcers and arguing talking heads and war and all the other things that we just leave turned on in our house. I don't think that's natural. And so I don't think I, as a leader in the youth and family community, can change that. But what I can do is encourage kids to get outdoors in the middle of it all. Because once a kid gets outside and starts to love the outdoors, they start to get bored with the interior. And so, yeah, I think and quit overbooking kids.
So one of the things we ask everybody is, if you had a billboard that everybody could see, what would you put on your billboard?
Go outside.
That's what I
couldn't have seen that coming. Yeah.
I mean, it's, after I'm 60 years old, Karl, and the only thing that I've learned in life is that your personal health is the only thing you're going to live with the rest of your life. And I've been outside so much, and I've learned, speaking of having everything, all the information in the world at our fingertips, I've continued to learn so much about the benefits of the outdoor experience, that outside of drinking water and getting plenty of good sleep, go outside. You get outside, you start to walk, you start to breathe out your worries, you start to sweat a little bit, and a lot of today's modern world, it doesn't go away, it just gets off your shoulders, and it gets out of your bloodstream, and it gets out of your guts, and it gets the tension out of your life. And so I really believe in it. I really do. Just want to thank you both for having me on, and I love watching your messages on social media. I love how you guys write books the way you do, and I love watching you guys. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. We're glad that we were able to make this happen.
And even though you've darkened,
cool, right on.
Even though you've darkened out now, you've succumbed to the limits.
Yeah.
Of your electrical whatever, since you're dependent on natural light and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we have battles. So sometimes think being home more together means we argue a little more, like turning lights on and off. We have different ideas about whether the lights should be on. So anyway, Jonas, thanks for being on. For the listeners out there, I want to thank you for coming along on this journey with us, for continuing to tune in, and we kind of watch the downloads occasionally just to see what's going on, and we notice that there's some people out there, so we appreciate you. And as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.